Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
If I was feeling a little less concerned by the state of the nation, I'd probably be drawing your attention today to a survey of our favourite foods. I love this sort of stuff. I have very horny-handed tastes when it comes to food. I am a big fan of what you might describe as traditional peasant food. So I'd much rather have, for example, a Scotch egg than a beef Wellington. But I digress slightly. We'll have a little look at this later in the programme. What do you think get the worst? What do you think get the very, very worst responses from the Great British Menu? And I say British because one of them is I'll give it away completely, won't it, if I say it's a specifically Scottish dish. Some of my all-time favourite dishes are among the least popular in the land. I don't know what that says about me. 5 minutes after 10 is the time. Brexit, sorry, it's got to be done. It's getting closer, October the 31st, Halloween. If the last time it was supposed to come out was the day before April Fool's Day, and this time it's supposed to come out on Halloween. It's great, isn't it? It's almost like the planets are trying to send us a message. And no deal. I don't think the needle moves, does it, on this? Some people claim you have to leave no deal on the table because it's a negotiating tactic, and they say when you're in business... Actually, do you know what? I am going to explain again why that's absolute idiocy. I appreciate I'm wasting my breath. People who understand it will agree with me. People who don't understand it will not agree with me. But here's the thing, right? When you go into the estate agents or into the car showroom to buy a new house, or when you go into the office or you invite into your office people who run a different company with whom you're keen to do a deal, right? If you walk away... Right, write this down. I'll try and do it in words of one syllable, but I can't think of one that would replace the word away. If you walk from the deal plate... No, that's not going to work. If you walk away from a negotiation in almost all circumstances, the key question is, where are you walking towards? You're walking away from the table, right? But you're walking towards what? Now, if you're negotiating with a business about possibly cooperating on a new project in the future, if you're negotiating with a car salesman about possibly buying a new car, even involving some part exchange of your old one, or if you're negotiating with an estate agent and a vendor about possibly buying a new house, if you pull out of that negotiation... Okay, I know where you're walking away from. You're walking away from the car showroom, from the business negotiation, from the estate agents. Where are you walking towards? Where are you walking to? Okay? The answer is the same in all three scenarios. If you walk away from a negotiation to buy a new car, or a negotiation to open up a new branch of business with a commercial rival, or if you walk away from negotiations to buy a new house, you walk back to where you were before. Yes? You walk back to where you were before the negotiations began. So you keep your old house, you keep your old car, you continue to conduct your business on precisely the same terms that you were conducting it on before you opened up negotiations about the possibility of opening a massive new factory with your putative partners. Now, listen, I could be wrong here. It just is important to state that, of course. But it seems to me that it's an observation of such unerring simplicity that the decision not to understand this must be deliberate rather than intellectual. So when people say, and you hear them usually possessed of quite posh accents, I don't know why that is, I don't know why I'm mentioning it, but when they say, you absolutely have to leave it on the table, otherwise no negotiation ever works unless you're prepared to walk away. Now that might well be true, but in any other field, in any other sphere, in any other example that I can think of, and there may be examples that you can think of that support the notion that Brexit negotiations aren't fundamentally different from all others. But from where I'm sitting, if we're walking away from these negotiations and leaving without any deal at all, we're not walking back to where we were before the negotiations started. We are not walking back to senior membership of the largest trading bloc in the history of humanity. We're not walking away from 82 independent free trade agreements and hundreds more attendant treaties and deals that allow us to trade with the rest of the world. We're not walking back to freedom of movement of goods and services and people. We're not walking back to one of the strongest economies in the world. We're walking into the complete unknown. No. Time to channel Donald Rumsfeld. We're not walking back into the complete unknown. We're walking back into a mixture of known unknowns and unknown unknowns and an occasional known unknown. In other words, we know that if we don't sign the withdrawal agreement, the passage of everything from aeroplanes over our heads to medicine into this country is potentially compromised. We don't know for sure because we don't know what will happen. But we're not walking back to the situation that we're currently in. This isn't an opinion, is it? This is just a statement of fact. Can we all at least agree on this? If you walk away from these negotiations, if you leave with no deal, you don't go back to where we were in 2016. You go to an entirely new place where we have absolutely no trade agreements in place. We would potentially, and again, I'm not an expert, so I don't know whether there are kind of holding tactics, we would potentially become the only country on the planet. We'd sink just below Mauritania when it came to our freedom and ability to trade freely with other countries. That, for me, for 2 years now, since this word no deal was first introduced into the Brexit vocabulary, long after, of course, the Brexit vote had been delivered, but hey, such is life. As long as no deal has been in the Brexit vocabulary, that has been, for me, the inalienable truth. It's stupid to talk about walking away in the context or in reference to all other types of negotiations, because any other negotiation that you walk away from sees you walking back to where you were when the negotiation began, which is not what we will be doing. So what we seem to have arrived at, because of the failure to understand the simple meaning of words, the simple meaning of principles, and the deliberate attempt by some very dodgy characters to persuade the rest of us that they know what they're doing when they quite clearly don't, it seems to me that we have to leave. This seems to me to be the position, okay, that I hear chancellors like Boris Johnson espousing. We need to be prepared to leave with no deal because it will spook the other lot. But, brackets, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, we know it will be a disaster for us if we do it. So it's that old line about chopping off your arm so that you can hit someone else over the head with it. You know, well, they're not going to do this because we'll hit them over the head. What with? With the arm that we've just chopped off our own body. I've said it before and I've said it again, this entire rhetoric of you have to be prepared to take no deal is equivalent to threatening to hit somebody with your own testicles. The idea that you're going to do some sort of damage to them without paying any attention whatsoever to the scale of the damage that you're going to do to yourself. And I don't get it. I don't understand why intelligent people... I can understand why if you're going to make a killing out of this, you might be up for it. If you've got millions invested, if you've opened up a couple of funds in Dublin and you've got loads and loads of investors' money riding on a sort of a tidal wave of unregulated, cheap, shoddy goods piling into this country, which poor people will have no choice but to buy. I can understand why you might be in favour of it. If you've become famous and rich off the back of telling lies about the European Union for 30 years, I can understand why you might go for it. If it's the only chance left of you ever becoming Prime Minister, which has been your dream since you were 6 years old, despite the fact that it would almost certainly involve throwing the country under the cart, I can see why you would go for it. Then why would anybody else? Why would anybody else choose to think that there's any wisdom whatsoever attached to this claim that, oh no, you have to leave it on the table? I don't know. I don't get it. So that's sort of observation stroke question number one. Is that analysis correct? So, well, no, it just is, I think. But you're welcome to tell me that it isn't. It should be fun. The second bit is some of the stories that are beginning to emerge and not getting anything like the coverage that they need involve the people who will be actually dependent upon preparations for no deal, warning us that there aren't any. The European Union is moving mountains to get itself ready. It's advising businesses to get out now of the United Kingdom because the likelihood of no deal is increasing by the day. That they have been preparing for no deal for years. It's the other element of this whole conversation that I find utterly baffling, because there's now a sense abroad that we haven't made it clear enough to them that we're prepared to walk away with no deal, but they've been preparing for it for years. We weren't ready in March for it, and the clever money says we're going to be even less ready in October. So those two, and I'm going to call them cons rather than calumnies, those two cons combine to create a scenario of utter chaos. We won't walk away towards no deal. We'll walk away towards the complete unknown. And simultaneously, they're preparing quite extensively for it, but you're still being told by the usual suspects that they're not frightened enough of us doing it. Does anyone want to try to make sense of this for me? And if you're in business, what will it mean if we crash out with no deal on October the 31st? I'd like to apologise in advance for not asking you this question often enough, but I did begin to think at the beginning of the year that maybe the prospect of no deal was sliding away. I think Rees-Mogg told us it had disappeared, didn't he? Almost as good as his book about the Victorians. So that's the other bit of today's inquiry. What happens to you on October the 31st, if you currently depend upon any of the free trade agreements that we have in place as members of the largest trading bloc in the history of humanity? Now, I'm grateful to Leo for this. It seems to me to sum up the situation, but possibly you see things differently. He writes, I love all the talk of how keeping no deal on the table, even though we don't want it, is such a clever tactic to intimidate Brussels. Yes, because obviously Brussels cannot read the UK news. I'll play you a clip shortly of a cracking little package that Mark Stone over at Sky News has put together of people on, if you like, the other side of the channel talking about the stuff that we let the usual suspects talk about here unchallenged. The latest being, we are prepared to crash out with no trade agreements, with no deals, with no transitional arrangements, with no withdrawal agreement, with nothing. We're prepared to do that. And somehow telling them that we're prepared to do that will make them change a 3-year-old position. Do you know, I almost envy people who don't hear those words and despair, because I kind of think, well, ideally, you can see something that I can't see, in which case, give me a ring and show it to me. But the other is, almost emotionally, I'm beginning to envy ostriches. David is in Streatham. David, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James. James, I'd just like to ask you something.
Doesn't really work like that. Can we just improve the phone line? I don't know what you've done since you spoke to the producers, and then if you could at least begin by answering the questions that I'm asking.
Okay. What's your first question? Sorry, because I was answering a question.
All right. Well, I'll give you a little minute to get your thoughts together, and then I'll come back to you. So the questions that we're asking on the programme today are pretty simple. When people say we must be prepared to walk away from negotiations, how do they accommodate the fact that almost always means that we walk back to where we were before? Brexit is the polar opposite of that. We walk in to the complete unknown. Simon is in Reading. Simon, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. I think the thing that I find impossible to get my head around is if we leave with no deal, the EU have made it very clear that before they'll even begin trade negotiations with the UK, they're going to say, right, well, let's first of all have an agreement which deals with the Irish backstop and the 39 billion.
And citizens' rights.
And citizens' rights.
Yeah, these are the three things that are non-negotiable.
They're non-negotiable.
But I'm old enough to remember when Brexiters said they wanted to negotiate all of that before they cracked on with the trade agreements.
I know. So I guess the thought that's going through my head is, are the Tory leadership candidates who are advocating walking away with no deal, they're either thinking that they are quite happy with no long-term free trade agreement with the EU, and I can't believe they really believe that.
Well,
or they're thinking...
Go on.
Or they're thinking that this is just bluster, and give it 6 months of no deal, there'll be so much chaos in the UK and also in the EU that will bring the EU back to the table, because, again, they've miscalculated the who needs who more.
Back to that line, back to the they need us more than we need them, even though the preparations that they've put in place
Yeah.
Do you know what I think it probably boils down to? And this is more of an emotional than an intellectual observation. It's a complete, an almost DNA level failure to grasp our status internationally. So, we're a powerful country and we're a wealthy country, relatively speaking, but a lot of that power and that wealth is contingent upon our senior membership of the largest trading bloc in the world. The more I look at these people, the more I think they somehow just think that eventually they're going to get a flag out and expect everybody else to faint in respect and admiration of the British tradition and the British history. That's all I've got.
Britannia rules the waves.
That's all I've got. Because what else makes sense? To answer all of the questions you pose, what else makes sense? Why will they suddenly change their mind? Answer when they finally grasp the full might of Britannia, as represented by Marc Francois and Dominic Raab.
Yeah.
Merry Christmas, Simon.
Thank you.
It's 10:23. Steve's in Romford. Steve, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. Yeah, I mean, from a business point of view, it's a huge cash flow problem. Everybody keeps saying we're still going to, BMW and Mercedes still want to sell our cars in the UK. And we will, and we do want to buy their cars.
And we currently buy cars from countries with which we don't have free trade agreements. So it's no one saying it's year zero. They're just saying it's going to be a lot worse than it is now.
Yeah, but the biggest problem is going to be is if you're a dealer in the UK buying £1 million worth of cars from Mercedes every month, at the moment you place your order and they deliver the cars to you and you pay them whenever your terms are for paying them. After Brexit, you've got to find £200,000 up front for the VAT on those cars before they can come into your warehouse. So therefore, like from a cash flow point of view, right, the VAT, I agree, you get the VAT back. But the fact is,
you've got to have the money there, and you don't have to do. This is your line of work, is it, Steve?
Yeah, you don't have to. At the present moment in time in Europe, you can buy anywhere in Europe the same as you buy from London, and vice versa.
Yes.
In the UK, we can supply anywhere in Europe.
But that's what a free trade area is, isn't it? That's literally what a single market does.
But every country has VAT,
right,
and every country is more or less 20%. So at the present moment in time, if you're a producer in the UK supplying Frankfurt with whatever it might be, if you're supplying them £100,000 worth, and use a round figure, £100,000 worth of goods, at the present moment in time, they pay you when your terms. There's no VAT on the invoice at all.
Okay.
There's no VAT.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Okay.
Yes.
So when you supply them, they just pay you £100,000. You pay the VAT in the UK when you sell the goods. You only pay for the VAT.
No, I've got it. So we've all been. Anyone who's ever been self-employed or run a little business understands the money that you need to have to pay. It needs to be in place to pay at the point where they want the money, and it might not be the most convenient arrangement for you to do. So you are worried that you're not going to have the money in place when it's needed, even though prior to crashing out with no deal at all, it wouldn't have been an issue at all.
Well, no, because as I say, the great thing is, it's a free trade. If you're bringing goods in from China,
it's free trade.
You've got to pay the VAT.
Well, I had to go to the post office the other day because my daughter had ordered something from Australia. She'd ordered, they call it merch, Steve. I don't know if you're aware of this. She'd ordered some merch from Australia, and we get the little card through the letterbox, and I think it's going to be the usual one. I've screwed it up in a ball and left it in your bin, but it wasn't. It was, could you come down and pay 12 quid for a T-shirt that only cost 15 quid in the first place? And that's what's going to happen to absolutely everything, is it? If we leave with no deal.
Well, yeah, because basically speaking, everything has got to have VAT.
But why aren't they screaming this from the rooftops? That's VAT. I'm talking about customs charges. If you come out with no deal, we don't have a customs union anymore, and that means that anybody who's... It means it's much... Every day I do this. It just seems astonishing to me that... Why isn't everybody in the media talking about this stuff?
Well, the thing is just make it easy. Most people buying on Amazon. If you go on Amazon at the present moment and you want to buy a product, there'll be 20 retailers selling the same product.
Yes.
And generally speaking, it'll all be in pound sterling.
Yes.
And generally speaking, you snap on the cheapest one because you know what you want to do.
Yes.
That product might be coming from France. Might be coming from Germany. After Brexit, they won't be able to deliver it because there's VAT to pay.
And customs charges.
And and possibly customs.
Well, not possibly customs charges. If we're not in the customs union, I think we...
Yeah.
How did you vote in the referendum, Steve?
I voted Lib Dem for the first time in my life.
In the referendum, how did you vote in 2016?
I'll stay in.
Oh, did you? All right. Because I wouldn't have been surprised, and I hope you don't take this the wrong way, if you'd voted Leave, because you just presumed that some of these clowns knew what they were talking about and that there would be a trade agreement in place. It would be the easiest deal in human history. They did need us more than we needed them, and all of this stuff would just sort itself out in the wash. So you've seen this on the horizon for 3 years.
Yeah. Yeah, well, as of 3 weeks ago, I don't know if you're aware of this. Do you know who our biggest trade agreement is with at the present moment in time if we come out of Europe?
South Korea.
No, the Caribbean.
Oh.
That's the biggest. So we do...
What's their premium car brand?
What?
Yeah, I mean, like the Germans make Mercedes and BMWs. What's the premium car brand in the Caribbean? Because you might have to start flogging them, Steve. You better find out, sharpish. And there it is, you know, a good-natured exchange between me and Steve, albeit that we're both... I hate it, because we're not on the different side from you if you're still believing the nonsense being spouted by the Farages and the Johnsons. We're all on the same side. We're all going to be affected in precisely the same way by the stuff that Steve understands and has explained. So why are we still waving our little flags for the charlatans that have led us to this? Feel free to challenge anything that's gone before. And particularly interested today in descriptions of what will happen to your business in the event of a kamikaze Brexit on October the 31st. Johnny's in Buckinghamshire. Johnny, what would you like to say?
Is it me?
I don't know. Are you called Johnny?
Yeah, I did.
And are you in Buckinghamshire? Have you rung LBC in the last 20 minutes hoping to get onto the James O'Brien programme?
Yes, thank you very much.
Right, then we've narrowed it down, and I think it's almost certainly you.
Marvellous. Okay, which of your points would you like?
Whatever you rang in to talk about.
I rang in to tell you that the point of leaving a no deal on the table is an internationally accepted negotiating tactic. Which
so what previous international negotiation would you point to as a precedent for this?
One doesn't spring to mind. I'm talking through.
But you said it was internationally recognised. I just want one example of where walking away from a negotiation involves walking to a completely new status quo as opposed to returning to the old one. Just one example, Johnny.
Hang on, you're misinterpreting what I'm trying to get across. The reason you're going to leave
but unlikely. No, I just want you to answer the question, because I like these phrases like internationally recognised, and you sort of glibly deliver it as if that somehow excludes you from having to explain what you mean. So if it's internationally recognised, there'll be loads of examples of negotiations where two parties engage in discussions, and if one of them elects to walk away from those discussions without having arrived at a deal, they don't go back to the status quo that they inhabited prior to the negotiations. They go back to a completely new and largely unknown status quo. So what's the example you've got of that?
Okay, great. New, unknown. Good.
So the example that you use to claim that it's internationally recognised, this tactic you describe, what examples can you offer us?
Let's move on from internationally recognised.
Well, only if you admit that it was a ludicrous phrase to you. No? Okay, here we go. So it's not internationally recognised.
Well, it's
because no one has ever done it.
America and Australia.
Because no one has ever done it.
Look, I'm not a historian.
Well, then don't come on national radio and tell my listeners, who are intelligent and deserving of a lot more respect, stuff that you know to be untrue.
No, hang on. I was calling about your car analogy and going to a dealership and then leaving with a no deal or anything.
Yes.
That made absolutely no sense in what we're talking about in the bigger picture.
I'm not responsible for your intelligence.
Well, thank God for that. Next, the point of moving into an unknown is because when we made the decision, rightly or wrongly, to leave Europe, we wanted to leave the control they have over us and also the other 60 nations or 40 nations or whatever who are not productive and basically rely on
40 nations in the European Union.
I can bring Google back up and work out the exact numbers.
You don't need Google. There's 28 currently, of which we're one. So there are 27 other nations. And let's just pick up on that word you used, control. So what is it that we can't do at the moment that we'll be able to do when we don't have any trade agreements in place at all?
Set our own customs limits. Set our own customs tariffs. Why do I?
We can't do that under World Trade
UK
Organization most favoured nation status. As soon as we offer or impose one thing on one country, we have to impose it on every country in the WTO. You can find this on Google.
That's fine, but as a sole trader and a businessman, we will still end up being able to trade. Where we're forgetting is that
the
we
question
need
is,
to
how
move
will it be
into new
better?
and uncharted territory.
How will it be better than what we currently
the
have?
world can change.
So that the world can change.
So that generally we can move into a new phase of even greater global trade and move away
so
from
by
the
leaving
euro.
by leaving the biggest single market on the planet, walking away from 81 established free trade agreements and countless other attendant arrangements and treaties, we'll be able to trade more than we currently do.
We will be able to trade more than we currently do.
Okay, Johnny. I think we use different Googles. I think we use different Googles. So tell me the thing that is going to be the fly in the ointment of your plan, the reason why this unicorn land won't happen. Is it because of EU intransigence or lefties?
The people who are negotiating on our behalf are politicians and civil servants and people who are not business savvy.
Yes.
Okay?
For example, people who know that there are 28 members in the European Union rather than people who think there are 40. We should have people who think there are 40 countries in the European Union doing the negotiations. Is that what you're telling us? Because that's what I've taken away from this conversation. You don't think they know what they're talking about, but you can't even count. It's a okay. If we crash out of the European Union with no deal whatsoever, something it's very important we leave on the table, because although we know it will do us incredible harm, it will scare the other lot into changing their mind and abandoning their negotiating position of the last 3 years and somehow doing something else. But we'll be okay. Can you give me some proof that we'll be okay? Well, of course we'll be okay. We won't sink under the waves. But the whole point of Brexit is to improve the situation that we're currently in. So how can you improve the current situation by making it worse? Whether you want to say short-term worse or not. How do you improve a status quo by making it worse? And I guess if you don't ask yourself these questions before you ring in, you end up sounding like Johnny in Buckinghamshire. And no one wants to sound like Johnny in Buckinghamshire. Brian is in Edmonton. Brian, you said you don't know a lot about politics, but you know a lot about negotiating.
Yeah, I've been in sales, I suppose. Well, I'm not in sales at the moment, but I was in sales for 25 years. I spent 13 years selling to people, face-to-face, and I spent 12 years selling to businesses at the very highest level. My favourite sale by far was, and the most successful sale that I ever had, and I used it multiple times, was walking away from the deal.
Now, if you walked away from a deal, where did you end up?
With the deal.
Okay. If you walked away from the deal, you don't end up with the deal. If you walk away from the deal, you've got to be prepared to have no deal. You're familiar with the phrase "no deal." It's kind of informing the entire conversation in the country at the moment, and certainly on this programme. No, I don't. I want you to tell me, if you end up with no deal at all, what was the status quo?
I never ended up with no deal when I went to walk away from the deal. Never, not once.
Okay.
So would you like me to explain it to you?
No, I understand what you're saying. You're saying we're going to threaten to walk away with no deal, and that will make the EU do more of what we want.
I'm not talking about the EU.
Well, why have you phoned me then, Brian?
Because you asked about why go in with a no-deal negotiation.
No, not a no-deal negotiation, with no deal. And you phoned me up to say you never ended up with no deal. You're the polar opposite of someone with something to contribute to this conversation.
Yeah, but I always went for no deal. It's a different situation in sales. But
it's completely different, Brian, which is the point I've been making all morning. If you are negotiating to flog fridges and you threaten to walk away, but the bloke really needs fridges, he might invite you back and reopen negotiations, because your situation doesn't change. You're exactly where you were before you started negotiating. If we walk away from the European Union with no deal, we are not going back to where we were when we started. We are going back to a country that doesn't currently exist, a country with no free trade agreements, a country with no customs union membership, a country with no single market membership, and a country that has literally nothing in the file marked free trade agreement. So do you see why it's completely different from all the sales negotiations you undertook in your glittering career?
It really isn't.
Okay. Well, you could have just said, no, I can't see it, James. Paul's in Dublin. Paul, what would you like to say?
Just a comment on a technical situation which may arise in the UK if they go out in a hard Brexit. I'm involved, but I have involvement in the waste business here in Dublin. And all waste within the European Union is controlled by European waste directives in the United Kingdom, Ireland. Any waste that moves around in Europe is controlled by those. There are regulations in relation to what can be moved and what authorities have to be notified. Now, if the United Kingdom leaves on a hard Brexit, right, they won't be able to import any secondary metals into the UK from the European Union because there will be no agreement to do that, right? Also, they won't be able to export any secondary metals from the United Kingdom to the rest of the European Union because there won't be any agreement. And it's also possible the United Kingdom might not be in a position to export secondary metals outside of the European Union because
how do we make this sound sexier, Paul?
I don't know, but most of the third countries in the world, their agreement is with the European Union for the importation of secondary metals. So they won't have an agreement with the United Kingdom. And the United Kingdom will have to quickly move. Well, these things take time to move to get it. But it'll
so overnight, this is your field, is it? This is your sector?
Yeah, that's right. I'm involved, yeah.
What overnight, what happens when we wake up on November the 1st? What happens? What will scrap metal merchants or people in this industry, what won't they be able to do easily that they currently can do without any headaches whatsoever?
Well, first of all, the big players in the UK will not be able to import from the rest of the remaining European Union because there won't be an agreement between the European Union and the UK. European Union won't allow anybody in the European Union to export to a third country unless there's a specific agreement. That's to do with environmental protection, right? That's usually
we could still bring in stuff from countries that don't have any regulations or legislations.
Well, nearly most countries do now worldwide, and most
these regulations and these would be contained within trade agreements.
Yeah, the agreement would be, say, between the European Union and, say, Argentina or something like that. Argentina would have an agreement to move stuff up forward and back between, but they wouldn't have one with the UK. So the UK would be buying blind, and it's unlikely they could do that. Even Argentina would have, within their own country, people who are exporting to the European Union would have to fill out forms, but there wouldn't be a form to fill out to the United Kingdom because that wouldn't be because on the 31st of October that wouldn't have been an option. You know,
how do you rationalise? I'm in Dublin at the weekend, and I'm looking forward to some of the conversations I'm going to have at the Dalkey Book Festival because
brilliant festival.
So I gather. I can't wait actually, but. And I've been reading the op-ed in the Irish Times this morning about how we look from where you are. How do you make sense of it? I'm right in the middle of it. I have been since it started, and I kind of can't believe what's unfolding in front of me. But from the other side of the Irish Sea, you know what you're talking about, and our politics is dominated by people who don't.
Yeah, they don't seem to have any idea of the technicalities of disentangling themselves from the European Union after 45 years. That is a very, very difficult thing to do. I just think some people in the UK are deluded about their position in the world. The UK is an incredibly important country. It's the world's fifth largest economy. Incredibly important, right? But it's not that important. You know, it's not. You know, I would equate it. If you think like the Premier League in the UK, you have your Liverpools and your Manchester Cities, and you know, the UK is. When they're in the European Union, you're up at the top. You're up there with the big boys, right? But if you leave, you're going to be mid-table. You're going to be one of the bigger, small players. That's what the UK would be. So they're not that deluded about it.
I like that analogy. So it's a bit like, look, it's Manchester City, if they left the Premier League tomorrow, the Premier League would be the poorer for it, but it would still exist. Yeah. Manchester City would be playing with themselves, if you pardon that rather unfortunate expression.
I would say more that the United Kingdom, being part of the European Union, you are Manchester City. Yeah. When you go out, you turn into Everton. You know, solid mid-table.
Everton?
But that's
it's Kidderminster Harriers.
Well, I know. The United Kingdom is still going to be hugely important, right? But
like Kidderminster Harriers. No, you're better off with an Everton, maybe, or kind of, I don't know, a Norwich City. Oh, Paul, thank you. I'm getting asked quite a lot at the moment. What do you do to sort of keep the home fires burning? Keep the lights on? And the answer is an unceasing search for people who know what they're talking about. I do it on air, obviously, although we often have quite a lot of fun with people who have no idea what they're talking about. But of course, the requirement there is that they have to think they do. But also, I still find myself happening upon people who are supremely qualified to comment upon Brexit-related issues specific to a particular sector. and I haven't come across them before. I'm a bit embarrassed to say that Duncan Buchanan falls into that category. He's the policy director of the Road Haulage Association. And before we ask Duncan about preparations for a so-called no-deal Brexit, I just want to really clarify something, because the old Project Fear scaremongering rhetoric hinges upon this question: what's in it for them? Okay, so what you have to bear in mind is that Duncan's job in many ways is to facilitate and explain the issues facing the road haulage industry, the road haulage sector. He's not predicting anything or campaigning for anything or lobbying or hypothesizing. It's his job. So if there are alarm bells ringing by the time we finish talking to him, you have to recognise the very simple fact that would involve him risking driving away business. So, in other words, I'm saying the guy's got to be about as trustworthy as it's possible to be in the context of Road Haulage Association. I'm delighted to welcome Duncan Buchanan onto the programme. How prepared is the Road Haulage Association, broadly speaking, Duncan, for the no-deal Brexit that Boris Johnson was punting yesterday?
Before we start, I'd just like to say thanks for bigging me up to such an extent.
Well, don't let me down, Duncan.
that makes me sound the oracle that will know all of the answers. And I think that all I can do is represent what our members see and the problems that our members are confronted with what's coming. And I think really a really important point to remember here is that as the logistics industry, as part of the logistics industry, we have to deal with hundreds and thousands of different types of regulations and different types of things that confront us on a daily, weekly and strategic basis. So from our point of view, all we're interested in is solving the problems of moving goods between point A and point B.
Right.
We have no other axe to grind other than we are representing our members who do this work and who want to do it in a clear, safe and consistent way.
So in many ways you speak of the importance of objective information and the avoidance of this exhortation to always be perceived as or picking a side. You're just talking about the facts.
That is absolutely correct.
Okay.
We have rigorously taken a not in favour, not against, just we need to try and find a way to make whatever happens work.
Yes.
And that's all we're interested in doing. We're trying to find ways to make things work. And that's the context which we've come from for over 2 years.
So talk to me now about the UK's preparedness for a no-deal scenario kicking in October the 31st of this year.
For where we are today, there are huge, huge gaps. And there are huge gaps because what we're talking about in terms of bringing in new border controls is very complicated. Now, there are some things that are in place and have been put in place and were put in place for March and April. Contingency measures that allow trucks to move for 2019 without the need for permits. There are various other things that have been put in place. The problem we have is that for the border to work, everyone needs to know what they're doing. And with the border for road haulage between the UK and the EU, that is not the case. Traders, importers and exporters, there are 250,000 of them, according to HMRC, who have never traded internationally before, who've never had to fill in a customs
Just let me
form.
clarify that. They have traded internationally, but only with international countries that are in the single market. So they've never traded internationally beyond. Have I got that right? Or
Yes, you've got it. You've got it right.
so they suddenly moved from so you might as well, Barcelona and Birmingham would be the same in trading terms, but suddenly they're only going to be able to deal with Birmingham. They haven't got what they need in place to deal with Barcelona.
Correct. Absolutely right. At the moment, someone can deliver to Dorking or Dusseldorf, and providing you use an operator who's an international road haulage operator, there is nothing that you do that any different.
Wow.
That's the situation at the
I
moment.
see that we're both fans of alliterations as well, Duncan.
Yes, sorry about that.
I love it.
The dogging in Dusseldorf is one I've used for the last 2.5 years.
I'm having it. So looking at the numbers, and you can explain what the EORI and the TSPs are.
Yeah.
There should be just shy of 250,000 in place for both of those documents, for both of those required paperworks to trade with the EU post-October the 31st. As things stand, 69,000 businesses have filled in the EORI and 17,500 have filled in the TSP. What does that mean?
Essentially, you can't import goods without without an EORI number. It's a fundamental thing. Your goods will stop if you don't have an EORI number. A road haulage operator also needs an EORI number to conduct its part of the paperwork. The EORI numbers are very quick to get, and in fact that. When push comes to shove, by the time October comes around, I would expect within a week or two, people would learn that actually you're going nowhere without this. Get it done.
Good.
So
well, we'd urge people to do it now, then, just in case.
We've been urging our members, because it's not just the haulage industry; it's anyone who's importing or anyone who's exporting needs to have these numbers. It's a version of a VAT number. For a company that has a VAT number, we tested it here at the Road Haulage Association. We applied for an EORI number. It took 10 minutes.
Well, that's good news. Sort of.
Oh, yeah. No. There are things, as I say, there are things that are in place that have been done. You mentioned TSP, which is Transitional Simplified Processes, which work the idea is to take away paperwork away from the border. It doesn't take away paperwork. It just means that you do it later. Every single shipment that comes into the country will still need to have an import customs clearance process done on it. You will have to have an EORI number to be allowed to come into the UK. That's for each and every single import document. And
right.
On top of that, for the road haulage industry, the UK government has decided to follow an approach for something called safety and security declarations that requires the road haulier to resubmit all of the information and data about about every shipment on a lorry again. Now, if you think about
every shipment on a lorry. So if I had, you could have thousands of different or hundreds of different shipments.
We actually had one of our members bring a photograph of one of their lorries to a meeting we had with HMRC and others, and there was about 13,000 individual shipments in the lorry.
And he'd need paperwork for each one of them.
And every single one of those has to have data entry put in for them. It's a massive task. Now, of course, people will adapt. They will consolidate shipments together so that they're done in a different way. All of this takes time. But the TSP does not take away the paperwork. It just defers it. The other thing that we need to bear in mind is that European customs authorities and UK customs authorities are expecting road haulage operators to use a system of transit. In other words, you've pre-declared things before you even move. If you haven't pre-declared your goods into France, you're not even allowed on the ferry. So we knew that when we were facing the March situation, that the vast majority of lorries, the overwhelming majority of lorries, wouldn't have got on the ferries. They would have actually ended up at Manston. And that's thousands of them. And all we're trying to do as the Road Haulage Association is stop the problems.
I understand that.
There are basic facilities called offices of transit or offices of destination, offices of departure. They're not in place. There needs to be capacity for every lorry to go through a scanning check for all of the shipments that are on the lorry. And those
13,000 of them, potentially.
Yeah, but
I know that's a big example.
That's a huge and extreme example. We have also many lorries that come in with one shipment on them.
But they still need to be scanned in a way that they don't currently.
Yeah, but the goods don't need to be scanned. It's the paperwork needs to be checked and that you've got the valid paperwork. And it's taking everything to a different level.
And hopefully we'll talk again because I feel we're only scratching the surface. But before you go, as I understand it, we've also got to factor in the skills and labour shortages at the ports where all this will be taking place that are currently in situ.
Well, there is a lack of qualified staff to do customs declarations. People need to understand. People need to understand that the people who are importing from China or America or South America now, there is an entire system. The people are in place to actually handle it. The importers know what they're doing. The exporters know what they're doing. Everyone is familiar with all of the paperwork that is required to do this work. In the case of European land-based transport, that is road haulage, those skills have largely disappeared. There is a handful, 1 or 2% of the volume deals with Turkey or Switzerland or other places where you need to do these processes now. The point is that the 98% of the lorries that don't have to do that, the capacity is not there to handle it.
Duncan Buchanan, many thanks indeed, Policy Director of the Road Haulage Association. And as we were both at great pains to express and to confirm, no vested interest. He wants things to go well because his members will suffer if they don't. OK, I am persuaded that this is an utterly insane act of national self-harm, but I admire and respect men and women like him whose job really is to forget about the politics and just concentrate on looking after the interests of, in this case, members, in other cases, citizens and businesses. So, as I understood it, in the first instance, and hopefully it won't last very long, it's actually going to be easier for businesses to trade with the countries that we don't have current trade agreements with, because they'll just carry on as normal, than it is for businesses to trade with the countries that we currently have trade agreements with, which is, of course, the polar opposite of the logic that tells us we need to leave so that we can sign trade deals with the countries that we don't currently have trade deals with. You can find Duncan Buchanan on Twitter. I'd also recommend Dmitry Grozubinski, who is a fantastic Twitterer, a fantastic tweeter, but also, well, as he sort of describes himself, a trade nerd. See, what Britain needs now is trade nerds. And what we're getting is the mother of all bluffers. Ian Duncan Smith saying, Boris has assured me he'll be chairing all the committees. Now, there's a division there that I think is unbridgeable. How can anybody derive confidence from the prospect of Boris Johnson actually taking personal charge of stuff? You want an illustration of the nuttiness that we're engaged in at the moment. A lot of Boris Johnson's cheerleaders and fans are saying, don't worry, he'll surround himself with really talented people who will handle the detail. I heard Tom Swarbrick last night saying that the idea is among these people that Boris will behave like a CEO, so he'll just be like the figurehead, and he'll have all these good people around him to provide him with the detail. If you want to know what his relationship with detail is like, talk to someone like Steve Norris, the former mayoral candidate, or other people that dealt with Boris Johnson when he was at City Hall, and they will tell you that the actual day-to-day detail stuff was done by people like the late Sir Simon Milton. Deputy mayors. Johnson doesn't do detail. Ian Duncan Smith says, it's great news because Johnson has told me he's going to be in charge of the detail. And I just, as again, I have to remind you, I'm just telling you stuff. I'm not even expressing an opinion. I'm telling you that people who work with Johnson at City Hall say that he doesn't do detail. People who've been cheerleading for him say that doesn't matter because he'll surround himself with really good people, just like they said about Trump, actually. And Ian Duncan Smith is saying, oh, it's great news today. He's going to take personal charge of the detail. So they can't all be right, and yet they all ostensibly speak for 17.4 million people. And so the madness continues. 11:07 is the time. Let's get back to the phones. Thomas is in Windlesham. Thomas, what would you like to say?
Hello. I just wanted to make the point, really, that the reason no deal has to stay on the table is that what we voted for in 2016. We talk about hard and soft Brexit, terms that only really came about after the referendum.
No, they didn't.
And a hard Brexit is a no-deal Brexit, yes.
Well, no deal didn't appear in the national vocabulary until about October of 2016.
David Cameron said would leave on WTO terms.
The pledge in the vote leave, yes, but David Cameron lost, which means people didn't believe him. So the vote leave people, the vote leave catalogue said categorically, we will negotiate the best available deal.
Yes, and the best available deal isn't very good. It's not what we wanted. A soft Brexit.
No, but people who voted for
for.
vote leave voted for the deal that they said would be negotiated.
No, they.
Well, no, you might not have done, but you can't claim that 17.5 million people voted to jump off a cliff.
I think that 17.5 million people voted to leave the institutions of the European Union.
And Michael Gove voted for the withdrawal agreement, and Boris Johnson voted for the withdrawal agreement. So just accommodate those two facts into your analysis, if you will.
Of course they did. That's why I'm no longer a Conservative and I'm voting for the Brexit Party.
Brilliant. So you can't claim to speak for 17.4 million people if both of the chairmen of Vote Leave voted for the withdrawal agreement, which is why we need to put it back to the people.
Because the argument.
So you can speak for everyone who voted to leave, but the men who ran the Leave campaign can't.
Well, yes, but Boris Johnson and Michael Gove are both saying that they're prepared to leave the European Union on the 31st of October.
They are now, and they both voted for both voted for the withdrawal agreement as well. So there's no consistency there.
Because there was essentially a gun put to their head, and that they were threatened with no Brexit at all. This is why they voted for it. A soft Brexit isn't Brexit. We voted to leave.
And which campaigner prior to the campaign would you point to as representing that position? Was it because Nigel Farage, of course, said we could be like Norway or Switzerland? Is that hard Brexit or soft Brexit?
Of course, Norway and Switzerland is a soft Brexit.
So Nigel Farage was campaigning for a soft Brexit then?
No, Nigel Farage.
So what did he mean when he said we could be like Switzerland or Norway?
I don't know what he meant, but
I do, Thomas. He meant we could be like Switzerland or Norway, which you know, because you just said it, means a soft Brexit, which you claimed 2 minutes previously absolutely nobody voted for. So anybody who listened to Nigel Farage and voted to leave in expectation of being like Norway or Switzerland was voting for what you describe as a soft Brexit, and now you're telling me that nobody voted for a soft Brexit. Just run me through the logic of that, would you?
Okay, so how do you...
No, don't ask questions, just run me through the logic of what you've said.
But what's your question, sorry?
No, I can't do this, mate. Sorry. But actually, I will. You've said that Norway and Switzerland is a soft Brexit. Nigel Farage, while campaigning, said we could be like Norway and Switzerland. Ergo, he campaigned for a soft Brexit. You said nobody who voted to leave the European Union voted for a soft Brexit. I'm suggesting that for many people, Nigel Farage is seen as someone who persuaded them to vote to leave. So if they voted because he told them it could be like Norway and Switzerland, they voted for a soft Brexit. Logically, how can you now claim that nobody voted for a soft Brexit?
He mentioned, Norway and Switzerland, and that was a possible model of Brexit.
A soft Brexit. So how can you claim that nobody voted for something he told people they could have?
Are you claiming that Nigel Farage is a soft Brexit?
It's another question. I'm claiming that Nigel Farage will say whatever pops into his head at the first opportunity, but I'm reflecting on words that he actually uttered. I'm not asking you to speculate on what he might secretly think. He said we could be like Norway or Switzerland. You said that's a soft Brexit. You also said nobody voted for a soft Brexit. So talk me through the logic of those three facts.
This is 3 years ago. Let's take the situation as it is now.
No, let's not, because you were telling me what people voted for 3 years ago.
Yes. Well, what people have.
So if people voted to be like Norway or Switzerland, they were voting for a soft Brexit while simultaneously not voting for a soft Brexit. That's what you've said to me.
They voted to leave the European Union.
And be like Norway or Switzerland?
No, not at all. We were told...
Okay, well then you can deny reality, but the words came out of his mouth, Thomas. They came out of his mouth, just like the Vote Leave literature states that we will negotiate a deal. The last two manifestos that people pretended somehow represented a massive majority for continuing down this ludicrous path both stated that we'd negotiate a deal. You can tell me now, even though you never uttered the words no deal before October of 2016. You can tell me now that it's what you wanted all along, but you can't speak for anybody else. Do you understand that?
Yes, of course. But
Great. Well, we got there in the end. Luke is in Old Street. Luke, what would you like to say?
Hi, morning, James.
Hello,
always
Luke.
Good to speak to a fellow Amphipolian.
Carry on.
Basically, I wanted to kind of ask you a question, if I may.
It doesn't really work like
I wanted to ask... We're going to continue on to probably a little debate, so it's a good way of starting.
Well, I've been asking questions for an hour and 12 minutes.
All right, I'll let you ask me a question.
So you ring in and answer them.
A question in that case.
Go on then.
The question is there any benefit to Brexit at this stage? That would be my question. And my answer to that would be the benefit to Brexit is that we are now able to negotiate trade deals, or preliminary trade deals, let's call them, with countries we wouldn't have been able to touch if we were inside the EU's jurisdiction.
How many trade deals do you think we currently have?
Well, South Korea, we signed a preliminary trade deal the other day, and we wouldn't have had access to South Korea.
We already do. They've rolled over the terms of the EU's deal with South Korea, Luke. It's literally a carbon copy of what had already been agreed between the European Union and South Korea.
But is that not a benefit to Brexit? Is that not a benefit?
Mate, you have to listen to the words that I just said. You said countries we wouldn't be able to touch as European Union members. For example, South Korea. The deal that Liam Fox announced last week is a rolling over of the deal that the European Union has with South Korea.
Yeah, exactly. That's where you just said it. The European has to deal with South Korea, not Britain.
You said it's a country we wouldn't be able to touch. We've already got a trade agreement with them.
Not in. Well, look, we're a service industry.
Did you really go to Ampleforth?
Yes, I did.
I think your parents deserve a refund. A little update from yesterday's programme, when you'll remember I was intrigued by Esther McVeigh's claim that the airport that had been built using foreign aid couldn't be used because all the winds were blowing in the wrong direction. And we looked into it, and we concluded she probably meant St Helena. We've been in touch with her office since yesterday's programme, and we still think she probably meant St Helena, which is, of course, a British overseas territory. So it's money spent on British overseas territories, which I suppose you could describe as foreign aid, but I don't think it's what most people had in mind when that phrase was coined. And it has now been confirmed since October 2017 that St Helena Airport has indeed been running commercial flights. So the example she offered up as evidence that foreign aid needs fixing was an airport that both works and is situated in British overseas territories. I'm delighted to say that Esther McVeigh has agreed to join us to explain herself this morning.
It's in one of the continents abroad. We know we've got that airport where we can't take off and land because of the winds, the crosswinds there.
So I'm glad we cleared that up. Back to Brexit negotiations and what have you. Pete is in Bridgewater. Pete, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, I just thought of an analogy that I thought might fit.
Big fan of analogies, Pete.
In terms of when you walk away from a negotiation, are you in the same position as when before you walked away? And I just thought of my experiences at car boot sales, where you see something and you ask how much it is, and they'll tell you a price, and it's quite common to walk away if you can't get them to drop their price.
Exactly.
Now, when you walk away, you know that you can go back and you're in a stronger position.
Yes.
At the end of the car boot sale, of course, people are probably just going to take all their stuff and take it down the tip that they couldn't sell anyway. So they're quite happy to drop their price towards the end.
I think that might be where the analogy falls down, because the European Union doesn't have to close at 2 o'clock and give the playing field back to the school, does it?
No, but as I'm walking around to all the rest of it, I've got all those other people that I can try and find a better deal with. And
for example?
Well, just all of the other traders that are there.
So you mean all the other trading blocks in the world?
If you like.
For example?
Well, if you're going to say about trading blocks, I mean, of course, the EU being a big trading bloc. So within my analogy, that would be like walking up to, 10 or 20 traders that have all got one stand. So it's obviously going to be much harder to negotiate and get my deal.
No, it'd be more like 10 or 20 traders with 10 or 20 stands, all of whom can trade with each other without any charges or tariffs or checks.
Yep.
You would be paying the charges and the tariffs and the checks. And let's just take it to its logical conclusion. If you decide not to buy whatever it is you're going to buy, like not at all, you don't buy it from somebody else, you don't go to a different store, you just decide, you know what, I'm not going to buy that. Where do you go back to? When you reassess, have you got exactly the same status that you had before you contemplated buying?
I agree with that. But of course, in the politicians' conversation, it just occurred to me that although at the beginning we didn't know what our trading position or our negotiating position was, one of the things
we did know. We knew exactly what our trading position was, but people fibbed or didn't understand it and got amplified publicly.
That was a big thing that was coming out through the news, through the media.
And people do understand what single market membership and customs union membership means, except Nadine Dorries.
it occurred to me that one of the things that we did know that was said quite often was that it didn't matter that we didn't know what our negotiating position was, because these negotiations are always done right at the very last minute. I can't remember the name of the guy that said that.
But it wasn't true, was it? Because we ended up having to ask for an extension at the very last minute.
Indeed, it seems to me that if that's what they believe, if they believe that they're going to get a good deal at the last minute, it occurred to me that that's kind of what people do at car boot sales. They think
I'd take it up to a point. I shouldn't be too.
That's what they're doing. They're pushing the deadline.
No, they're not. I mean, I love analogies, and I've used a car boot sale analogy myself in the context of Brexit, but yours doesn't work, mate.
No, it probably doesn't.
Which is fine, and I'm grateful to you for joining in. I mean, crikey, compared to the last fella, you're practically Einstein. But it doesn't work. The only way the car boot analogy works is in the context of the divorce settlement or our payments for membership of the European Union. Because, of course, what happens is if you go to a car boot sale, you pay 20 quid to have a stall, and then you might make 200 quid that day. So you've made a profit of 180 quid, or once you've factored in your costs and what have you, you might have made a profit, let's say, of 100 quid. What Brexiters say is that we can save £20 by not having a stall, which is sort of true, but what they don't add is, in real terms, we'll be £130 worse off, but the 20 quid we would have paid to have a stall, we'll still have that in our pocket. And then you put that on the side of a bus without explaining that the money is spent in order to have a stall, in order to have membership of a single market and a customs union and access to, I think, 81 full trade agreements and 759 trade deals of varying weight and impact. They don't say any of that. They just put on the side of a bus, we send 20 quid to the car boot sale every week, we could send it to the NHS instead. And 17.4 million people fall for it. Although now, of course, I should add, in the interest of balance, they're pretending that they didn't. Glenn is in Barton-le-Clay in Bedfordshire. Glenn, what have you got?
Yeah, I mean, this might be the quickest phone call ever. You might be able to say yes or no to it. But if we've got, how many trade deals have we got? 144?
No, we've got 81 full trade agreements as members of the European Union. There are some under negotiation and on the way. It might have gone up to 82, actually, that, with... Right. But and then 7, according to the Financial Times, and I'm only parroting this, I couldn't tell you what they were, 759 other deals and arrangements in place that don't get described as full trade agreements.
Right. So can we keep those trade deals but be negotiating the tariffs rather than just leave?
No, because the whole point of having a full trade agreement is to have tariff-free trading.
But can we not? I mean, you know,
you can't have tariffs and have tariff-free trading. You were right. It is a very short phone call.
It is. Play Estimate Bay again.
All right, I will.
It's in one of the continents abroad. We know we've got that airport where we can't take off and land because of the winds, the crosswinds there.
Are you happy, Glenn?
Yeah. I mean, talking about analogies.
You're right. Talk about analogies. Here's Estimate Bay talking about airports. I've got a couple of bits of business to do. In terms of what the British media is telling you about what's happening in Brussels, you have two choices. You can either find out what people in Brussels are saying, or you can continue listening to people like Ian Duncan-Smith and Nigel Farage telling you what people in Brussels are saying. Thankfully, Mark Stone at Sky News has done precisely that. This is quite a long clip. I think it's around, is it 3 minutes or something? But pay attention, because not only do these people, I think, introduce themselves, they'll also tell you the truth.
Good morning. My name is Jean-Claude Piris.
My name is Agata Gostinska-Jakubowska.
I'm Philip Lambert. I've been during 23 years the Director General of the Legal Service, giving advice to the European Council.
And I'm a Senior Research Fellow at the Centre for European Reform here in Brussels.
So I'm a Belgian MEP and incumbent Brexit steering group member.
So first question, what do you make of the leadership race and the promises that the candidates are putting forward?
I think many of the contenders are actually disillusional about what they can achieve.
I see many people in denial of reality.
Because, as you say in English, they are promising unicorns and things which are completely unrealistic.
Dominic Raab says he will return to Brussels and demand that the EU ditches the backstop.
Well, good luck with that. Doesn't he think that Theresa May already did that? Well, actually, he did himself.
I don't think that the backstop can be ditched. In fact, any substantial reopening of the withdrawal agreement, it seems to me, is out of the question.
But they all say that at the very end, at the 11th hour, when no deal is right there facing the EU, that the EU will allow changes. No?
They think they have to do that in order to give some hope in their electorate, which is very particular this time. But no, it will not be possible.
He says he can solve the Irish border issue by paying money for alternative arrangements, for new technology, and the UK, will pay for it.
If it was possible to solve it with money, but it's not. It's a question of war and peace.
Boris Johnson, the favourite, he's refusing to pay the £39 billion unless the EU comes up with a better deal.
The problem is that this kind of argument obviously does not buy the UK any goodwill, neither in Brussels or in any member states. Moreover,
who would want to make any deal with the United Kingdom if any third country would know that actually the quality of the signature of the UK is close to zero?
A lot of the candidates have talked about the idea of embracing no deal. Don't be frightened of no deal. We can have a WTO Brexit.
That means on the 1st of November, suddenly the UK will have no trade agreements with anybody in the world. So it will be a unique country to do that. WTO oblige you to have the same custom policy, tariffs and so on with all countries in the world. And all these countries are free to do what they wish with you, with their tariffs. It's crazy. It's crazy. Nobody in the world is on a no deal.
And by the way, leaving without a deal proves rather your inability to strike a hard deal, a hard bargain. It means basically turning your back on a major trading partner. And again, that's not a good signal for other trading partners.
You kind of listen to that and really, really wish it was a different country doing this. Actually, don't even wish that, because that would just be cruel and vicious. But this failure of the British media to reflect upon any perspective except their own and to balance people who understand stuff with people who, bless their little cotton socks, don't, has brought us to this incredible situation where Boris Johnson, who of course wrote 2 columns, one encouraging us to remain and one encouraging us to leave, is now emerging as putative Prime Minister and somehow an advocate of no-deal Brexit, while simultaneously acknowledging how awful that would be. But we have to at least pretend that we're prepared to do it in order to focus the minds of the negotiators who've already finished negotiating with us. What are you left with? At least no one's saying Brexit means Brexit anymore. World exclusive comments now from Nigel Farage about his calls for Joe Brand to be referred to the police for making a joke on a comedy programme.
If they don't deliver this Brexit that I spent 25 years of my life working for, then I will be forced to don khaki, pick up a rifle and head for the front lines.
Oh, sorry, that wasn't the clip I was expecting. Louis is in Uxbridge to steer us back towards Brexit. Louis, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, mate.
Hello. There seems to be a lot of strong individual animosity towards deal or no deal individually, but the issue we've got is we've got blithering idiots in the Conservative Party that only seem to care about accelerating their own chance of survival. Now, what they first of all need to do is consider Nigel Farage's letter to the PM, which was to be part of the Brexit negotiations, because let's be honest, the Brexit Party, which I'm looking to become actively engaged in and visit the NEC in Birmingham on the 30th of June.
Yes.
These guys obviously know what they're doing, so they must have the best negotiating tactics on the table.
Why obviously do they know what they're doing?
Well, because Nigel Farage has been part of this European committee for years.
So which European committee?
Sitting on the table and giving these people a piece of... Sitting on the table and giving them
which table? Which committee has he been a member of for years?
So moving back on to the point, what I like to say is Brexit means Brexit without delving into the political aspect upon it. Boris Johnson...
Without delving into the political aspects of Brexit?
Well, at the moment, yeah. 'Cause
Okay, if I can
woken
just
up.
steer you
I've
back.
just woken up.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I have, yeah.
Are you sure you've woken up?
About half an hour ago, yeah. I've got to go to work in the afternoon.
We'll take your word for it. Just steer me back to what you said about the committee that he's been on for 25 years. Which committee are you referring to?
I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head.
Oh, well, that's unfortunate.
It is a little bit, yeah.
But what was the word you used to describe the people who were conducting the negotiations at the moment?
Blithering idiots. I mean, Boris Johnson couldn't find...
What was the name of that committee again?
Well, there you go. I suppose it could be the same steered in my direction, but there you go. But Boris Johnson couldn't find Uxbridge with the sat-nav, and he runs this constituency which is falling to pieces every day. It's getting worse. It's just...
And how do you think leaving the European Union will improve conditions in Uxbridge, Louis?
Boosted back into the economy, money.
How would there be more money?
Freedom of movement will be controlled. Job market will rise considerably.
With fewer people, there'll be more jobs.
Yeah, it will. And
just talk me through the logic on that, because here's a finite number of jobs, and here's a finite number of people. If we reduce the number of people, then the number of jobs will go up. Just talk me through that.
No, not reducing people and getting rid of them, but reducing. But what I mean by that is, right, I work in IT. In the IT industry, the market has become dead, and the pay scales are decreasing.
Yes.
And that is because you can outsource people from elsewhere, for instance, the EU, who will come in and work for next to nothing and go home and,
That's not really true, though, is it, Louis?
Oh, it is in my eyes. Listen, I'm a big
just
fan
because
of
it's
Nigel
true in
Farage.
your eyes, but of course you're a fan of Nigel Farage, because you clearly don't know what you're talking about.
I do know what I'm talking about. I've been stuck in this for ages.
Oh, good. What was that committee called again?
Oh, I don't know off the top of my head.
So why mention it? Or feel free to consult the bottom of your head if it helps.
As I say, I've just woken up. My brain's a bit scrambled.
And as I said, are you sure that you've woken up? 11:38, because I think you've just had an anxiety dream. Joseph is in Stroud. Joseph, what would you like to say?
Oh, man, I just had to call in on the point about the benefits of Brexit, because I've been racking my brains about, okay, we're doing this thing. Why? What's the benefit? How is this going to make life better?
There'll be more jobs and fewer people in Uxbridge, mate. Do pay attention, Joseph.
Oh, God, I'm so glad that I heard that, because I just couldn't make head or tail of this one without that help. No, the only thing I can think of that may be some kind of tiny little silver lining on this otherwise very dense and heavy cloud is that, and this is going to hurt some people who really don't want to hear this, but we've rendered ourselves irrelevant on an international scale. Nobody now
Not
cares.
yet, we haven't. Potentially. Do you think already damage is done?
Look, mate, we kind of look like a older middle-aged man who's decided that, very publicly decided, he's going to throw his wife, beautiful wife, and amazing children under a bus so he can get on Tinder and call his ex-girlfriends. So, yeah, the damage has kind of been done. That's not to say it couldn't be corrected, but
if our wife takes us back, then it's the relationship is going to be slightly more strained than it was before we
there will be tensions which
bought a Ford Capri and signed up for Tinder. Oh dear.
Yeah.
What about all the countries we'd be able to sign trade deals with that we can't currently sign trade? Oh yeah. Yeah, but there are people on Tinder, I think.
Ex-girlfriends.
Yeah, but there are people on there.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, there are, yeah. Yeah, no, nobody's argued that there are not people on Tinder. But that's not actually what I called in for. You got me, because that's also just like, from the outside, we don't get to say how we look to other people.
No, I know.
And that's how we look to other people. So if we actually go through with this, we've rendered ourselves essentially politically irrelevant on an international scale. Nobody will care, really, of any consequence. Nobody will care what Britain thinks. The United States won't care other than a place to sell their goods. The European Union won't care other than a place to sell their goods. Chinese won't care other than a place to sell their goods. Whereas now, if the Americans want to get anything done in Europe, they kind of got to come to us. Likewise, we're a bridge to the United States. All that's gone. And the benefit to that, losing that, is that costs us a lot of money. You know, we have to have a military, which is an expeditionary force. We have to have aircraft carriers and nuclear missiles and, big amounts of money poured into holding on to that. And if that's no longer a value, then we could, in theory, we're not gonna because of the shower the way that the way that we do things here and how we believe our place in the world is. But we could, in theory, then take that revenue and pump it into, or take that money and pump it into making this place a great place to make a life.
Well, you're sounding a bit Jeremy Corbyn-ish here. We'd abolish Trident, massively reduce...
No.
You are. I mean, it's not necessarily a criticism. You're entitled to take it as one. It wasn't intended as one. You but of course, we'd be investing money into an economy that is... embarked upon the largest act of national self-harm in history. I think I'm going to be the Brexit. Can I be the Brexiter and you be the sensible person? Because I'm going to say that my mate Keith, right?
Yeah.
My mate Keith went to school with someone who went on Tinder,
and he in the book.
And he met no. This is Keith. He's a fictional mate. It's Brexit. Okay. My mate Keith went to school with someone who went on Tinder, and he's now married to an absolute stunner.
You're already married to an absolute stunner. Everybody looks at her and goes, "Wow." Time slows
she's
down.
Not perfect. She's not perfect. She's not perfect. She's not the girl from Ipanema.
She's not. But time slows down when she walks by.
And everybody else in the world looks at that as a paragon of trading power to which they aspire, if they're geographically able to join or to do a deal with. And we're on Tinder, sitting on the sofa in our pants. John's in Folkestone. John, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, John.
Yes, my wife and I used to live in France, where I also had a small company.
Yes.
And I used to buy a lot from the UK, including a lot of vitamins and other supplements. And there was never any trouble, of course. No extra cost, etc. Now, when I move back to France, which I think we will do because of Brexit,
yes,
we'll not be able to do this anymore, particularly something like vitamins and supplements, because the single market gives us our health and safety protection, which we wouldn't have in France if we continued to buy.
You wouldn't be able to breed. Yes, I see what you mean. So you'd have to source them from within the single market or within the customs union.
Exactly, and that's what we'd do. And so, of course, we'd stop buying from the UK.
And that's probably an experience that will be replicated gazillions of times up and down, well, right across Europe and the world. I mean, one of the things I enjoyed about talking to Duncan from the Road Haulage Association was the reminder that even if, like you and I, people accept this is a really stupid thing to do, we still need people who will be trying to make the best of it. And it's not beyond possibilities that measures are put in place relatively quickly to in some way restore the system that you currently take advantage of when you buy your supplies from the United... Well, it's not, though, is it? Because it would be a trade agreement, and that would take years to negotiate. And we can't even begin negotiating it until we've settled the withdrawal agreement. And the three requirements of the withdrawal agreement are the divorce bill, the backstop in Ireland, and citizens' rights.
Exactly. And, of course, there would... it would be extremely difficult because, coming back to our living in France, I did occasionally buy supplements from America.
Yes.
And that was expensive, with customs duties and etc., VAT.
Yes.
And also, sometimes they were confiscated, quite simply, because they didn't come up to European standards and they were confiscated.
That is what they mean by a low-regulation economy. Standards put in place to protect consumers will be removed. But don't forget the plus. Cheap shoes for peasants.